Hey you, skinny. Yeah, you. You want to get jacked like a Goliath? Well, there's only one way. You can't get strong like Goliath without training with Goliath. So come on down to Goliath Athletic Center, Sump City location, now offering specials. First month free.
Dome Runners TV, your guide to the Underhive and beyond.
Hey there, Scabby Scummers and Gangers. Crimson Oracle here with another episode of Dome Runners TV. Today we are going to be looking at House Goliath and their Genesmithing upgrades and tactics cards. I'm going to go through all of them, give you my thoughts. These are some of the most powerful of the gang-specific abilities. It is, of course, limited by the fact that you can only take them when you recruit a fighter, but they are quite over the top in times, so with these, it is important that, there be a little bit of sense of fair play. So trying to go too hard on kind of gaming out the best way to kind of make your gang unkillable with this stuff is a little bit rough. You can take the debuffs to kind of reduce the cost of fighters, which is kind of cool because Goliath is an expensive per model gang. But I do recommend kind of being circumspect and not trying to kind of create the army of toughness 5 monsters that is possible with this gang and these upgrades. So before we get to that, I did want to mention that I am currently working on rules for Crute gangs as a homebrew project. I have already released the beta of the rules, which is in the show notes, but I am going to be updating them for a wider release on Saturday to get kind of things to a little bit further along point. It won't be the full version. I think that will probably take a little while longer for me to format and get it all kind of prettied up, but I'm definitely looking forward to everyone getting a chance to kind of kick the tires on that rule set because I spent a lot of time on it and I think that it's fun and interesting, and it kind of relates to the Goliath stuff in that I was inspired by the Genesmithing upgrades to do a Crute evolutionary upgrade system. So check it out. There's a link in the show notes. So with that, let's go on to talking about Genesmithing upgrades.
If you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and for as little as $2 a month you can become a patron and help support the show.
Each of the Genesmithing upgrades represents a different type of genetic modification to the Goliaths that you're playing with. Fighters can only receive Genesmithing upgrades on recruitment. Can't go back and change someone's genes after the fact. And fighters with the gang fighter rule can have up to 1 upgrade, and with the gang hierarchy rule they can have up to 2. And these characteristic changes affect their base profile for the issue of maximum stats and all that. Each fighter has a specific subtype. There is Vatborn, which is the default. You can pay 10 credits for a Natborn, or you can pay 10 credits for an Unborn. Each fighter can only take Genesmithing upgrades from their particular subtype. For the Vatborn, the first upgrade, or, Genesmithing Adjustment, is reduced bone density. For minus 10 credits, you can take the fighter and reduce their starting strength characteristic or toughness by 1. Now, this is not a huge cost reduction for what could be a pretty rough downgrade, but it is very useful if you have a fighter who you're trying to kind of get the cost lower on, and they are someone who's not going to primarily be using their strength, so maybe they're not going to be throwing a lot of grenades or going to be doing a lot of hand-to-hand combat, then it might be worth this upgrade just to save 10 credits. Next up, we have Corrupted Slug. All Goliath get a data slug put into their heads in order to have all the knowledge they need to do their jobs as quickly as possible. This Corrupted Slug upgrade or downgrade will reduce their cost by 5 credits and reduce their leadership, willpower, and intelligence by 1. Now, again, that's a lot of stats being debuffed for a small decrease in credits, but if you need that 5 credits in order to make your list work, it might be worth the upgrade. Next, we have the Fearless but Foolish upgrade for 5 credits. You can make it so your fighter does not care about their own safety. You increase their cool by 1, but you do reduce their intelligence by 1. This is a pretty straightforward upgrade, and unless your fighter is going to be solving a lot of puzzles, I would probably think this is a good buy. For 10 credits, you get Genetic Ancient. This Goliath comes from a long line of stable Vatborn, and as a result, you can increase their leadership, willpower, and intelligence by 1. This is a solid upgrade. Those 3 stats together really, granted, you're not going to use them as much as you use cool, but for only 10 credits, getting to boost all 3 is solid if it's a fighter that you really need to be dealing with leadership and stuff. This is a good one for leaders. Next up, there is Hardened Immune System. For 5 credits, poison is significantly less effective, so you are only ever wounded by gas or toxin weapons on a roll of 6 when rolling against toughness. This is really useful, especially if your opponents start using things that boost their toxin or gas rolls. For 15 credits, there is Hyper Healing. This fighter is magically able to continue healing like they do in the Amnio tank, and as a result you can roll an extra injury dice when taking a recovery test and choose which one you want to use. And additionally, in the post-battle sequence, if you have a lasting injury, roll a d6, and on a 6 the fighter discards it. Next up, we have Nerve Burnout for -5 credits. This fighter has taken some serious damage and their nerves do not work, and they are reducing their cool by 1. This is one that I would avoid just because cool checks are so important, but it could be fun when creating a sort of a berserker character. Next, there is Dermal Hardening. This allows you to increase the fighter's toughness by 1 because their body is significantly tougher than the average Goliath, who are already extremely tough. This is a very good buy. At 10 credits, you really just can't beat an upgrade like that. This is one that I would want to limit and not take on too many of your fighters. For minus 10 credits, there's Terminal Biology. The years are catching up to the fighter, and each time they suffer a lasting injury, roll a d6. On a 1, the fighter dies. This is, you're going to roll lasting injuries. That's going to happen. So unless you're role-playing, it's hard to imagine wanting your fighter to be more likely to die. So I would probably save the 10 credits somewhere else. But maybe for your story it works. Next up, there's Overdeveloped Musculature for 5 credits. This fighter is an absolute unit, just a total beast, and they are able to increase their strength by 1, but of course the cost of all that extra muscle means that they have to reduce their initiative by 1. A good upgrade for 5 credits, but of course if you are going to be fighting in a lot of situations where you might fall down, you might feel differently about that upgrade. Next, we have the Natborn upgrades. So for 20 credits, the Natborn Goliaths are +2 intelligence, +1 willpower, and -1 cool. And they can increase strength or toughness for 6 XP rather than 8. And when they gain an advancement, they have the option to skip the advancement table and simply increase their strength or toughness by 1, which is pretty nifty, but it's an expensive upgrade. Once you've upgraded a Goliath to Natborn, you can take Adaptive Biology for 10 credits. This fighter is able to reroll strength or toughness checks, and when hit by a weapon with the gas or toxin trait, that weapon will have to reroll their toughness check if they pass. Obviously, this is a really nifty upgrade, and I think it's well worth taking. It is expensive on an already expensive upgrade, though, so might just be one for your sort of close combat troops who are going to be up close and personal, and trying to put out as much damage as possible while taking as little coming back. Next, we have Adaptive Mind for 5 credits. This is kind of an interesting one. I think it's a little bit different from any of the other gangs. This fighter is able to use their secondary skill set as primary when spending XP. Now, this is situational. It will really depend on the fighter you put it on and what skills you are particularly looking for, but I really like the option because secondary skills really are pretty heavily penalized and don't get taken that much. Next, we have Alpha's Lineage for 20 credits. This fighter counts their leadership skill set as one of their primary skill sets, and in addition, if they have the group activation special rule, they can activate an additional fighter, and if not, they gain the group activation special rule. This is an expensive upgrade on an already expensive upgrade, but it does essentially allow you to create another mini champion or even a mini leader by buffing a champion. You could even give that champion the Commanding Presence skill, which would allow them to up to, 3 activations, so potentially more than your leader. It's kind of cool. Expensive, though. For 10 credits, there is Iron Flesh. This individual is incredibly resistant to pain, and they increase their wounds characteristic by 1, as contrasted by the other one that increases their toughness by 1. More wounds is always good. More wounds for 10 credits is phenomenal. This is a really good upgrade. It's one that you should definitely consider taking on your important fighters just because of how crucial having extra wounds is. For minus 10 credits, there's Overengineered. This fighter is kind of a mess, and unfortunately when you make lasting injury rolls, you have to roll twice and accept the higher result. This is kind of cool. I think it plays into Goliath's sort of lack of general regard for their fighters. Being able to kind of get your fighters cheaper just on the off chance that they're going to explode occasionally from getting shot, I think is kind of a fun thematic upgrade. For 10 credits, we have Prime Specimen. The fighter is a perfect example of their kind, and as a result, they can improve one of their characteristics by 1. For 10 credits, that is such a good upgrade. I mean, that's ridiculous, so do with it what you will. For 5 credits, you get Rapid Muscle Growth. This is an interesting one because it doesn't actually buff the fighter right now. It increases the maximum number of points that they can raise their strength characteristic. So you could have your Goliath potentially get up to strength 7, which is crazy because that essentially means you're punching like a plasma gun. But I'm into it. It's cheap, but it really comes down to how long your campaigns are. If you're playing short campaigns, you're probably not going to get 3 strength upgrades, but your mileage may vary. Next, we have the opposite of Overengineered, which is Redundant Organs. For 15 credits, this fighter, when they roll in the lasting injury table, rolls twice and accepts the lower result. And this can't be combined with Overengineered, obviously, because the two are opposites. But this is a really, really cool upgrade for someone you want to guarantee not to die. It's not obviously perfect. There are some chance that, you'll roll 250 some results or 260 some results that you really don't want, but it is such a better chance to keep this fighter alive than anyone else has. So definitely this is a good one for someone who's really important. For 20 credits, there is the Tyrant's Own. This means that this fighter is one of the offspring of the Over-Tyrant himself, and you can improve any 2 of their characteristics by 1, but it can only be taken by a leader. And let's be honest, there's very, very little reason not to take this on your leader if you want to. And here we have Tyrants Pride, minus 20 credits, and this is a Goliath who's extremely jealous. So only a Forged Tyrant can take it, but as a result, you can't take any fighters with the champion role in this gang. This one, combined with the Tyrant's offspring together, creates a leader that's the same cost. So I think that that's one to consider combining. I think that they're pretty much intended to be combined. If you're doing that, of course, then you're going to have to rely on something other than, the Goliath specialists like the Stimmer and whatnot. So I think that it's a really thematically interesting route to go down, but this is a pretty negative drawback because you can't take any champions. Even after the campaign starts and you get into it, you're still limited to that. So it's going to really make the gang about that leader. But you can do that and really have a fun time if that's what your goal is with the gang. Next up, we have Unborn. These are joiners, people who have come to House Goliath from outside of the house and who have gone through the rigorous process of upgrading their physique. For 10 credits, then Unborn is able to choose an additional primary skill set from Agility, Brawn, Combat, Cunning, Ferocity, Shooting, or Savant, but they can never select skills from the Muscle skill set. For minus 10 credits, you can give the Unborn a Data Slug overlay. Something is wrong with their Data Slug, and as a result, when they activate for the first time, they have to pass an intelligence check. If they fail, then that means they're subject to the insane condition. This is fun, and I always look for reasons to have insane happen on my boards because it's a rule that just doesn't get invoked all that often. But this makes your fighter a real liability, so, you know, take it with caution. I certainly wouldn't be putting it on anyone important. For 5 credits, you have Doc's Experiment. You select 2 of the characteristics between movement, strength, toughness, or wounds, and you increase 1 and you decrease 1. This is a really fun way to kind of make your character exactly what you want them to be, and at 5 credits, it's a relatively reasonable upgrade. It allows you to make a really tough character, or a faster character, or a really hard to kill character, or a really strong character, and all you have to do is just figure out which stat to make your dump stat. I like it a lot. Now, on the other side of the coin, there's Doc's Failure. Minus 10 credits, and you select 2 characteristics between strength, toughness, movement, or wounds, and you decrease both by 1. That is rough for 10 credits. This is really good for making a sort of themed Goliath gang full of different experiments gone wrong, but I just can't justify this myself. That's too much. For minus 5 credits, there's Genetic Outsider. This individual cannot use the grouped activation special rule, and it can only be taken on your leaders or champions. This is a decent, if you're not someone who uses the group activation rule a lot, which I personally am not, then saving the 5 credits seems sensible. Or if you have a fighter that you're going to be sending out to be kind of ahead of the rest of your lines, not going to be with another fighter, then don't bother with having the group activation rule and save the credits. That said, it's only 5 credits. It's not that big of a decrease for something that is using a lot of, you're kind of giving up a lot of utility. For 5 credits, there is Malformed. This fighter has the size and appearance of a Goliath, but their extra weight makes them ungainly and slow, so you increase their strength by 1, but reduce initiative by 1. A very sensible, straightforward upgrade, similar to one of the earlier ones. I definitely think that this is worth considering if you have a fighter that you're going to be putting into close combat a lot, that uses a weapon that is based off their strength characteristic. Next, there is Proto Goliath. For minus 10 credits, this fighter is not yet transformed into a Goliath, so as a result, you increase their movement by 1, reduce their strength by 1, reduce their toughness by 1, reduce their cool by 2, increase their intelligence by 2, and increase their willpower by 1. That's a lot of stat switching around, but essentially you're taking a Goliath and you're making more of a, prime normal human out of them, which is maybe not the best deal on Earth for only minus 10 credits, but, it depends on the fighter and what they're doing, of course. There is Scar Tissue for 10 credits. This gives the fighter a reduction to damage of hits taken. So it is to a minimum of 1, but if you're hit by a damage 2 attack, for example, it becomes damage 1, damage 3 becomes damage 2, etc. This is a really useful upgrade. You're going to be hit by multiple damage weapons at times, and they are devastating. So this can be really, really useful for keeping your fighter alive. And it's only 10 credits, so decent upgrade. For 10 credits, there is Survivor. This fighter has suffered untold hardships during their life, and as a result, when making recovery tests, they can re-roll one of the injury dice rolled, which is, that's okay. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say no to it. I don't think it's worth 10 credits personally. For 5 credits, there is Stim Implant. Experimental organs have been placed in the fighter, and they are allowed to, when they activate, increase their strength by 2 until the end of the round. But if they do so, they have to make a roll in the end phase, and on a 4-up, they suffer a flesh wound. This one is interesting because taking flesh wounds is not as big of a deal for Goliaths as other fighters, but it kind of depends on, what you're using this upgrade on. I think that a fighter who is getting into close combat, being able to increase their strength by 2 for a round is really useful. Now, this one, 2 lives for 5 credits, takes your Unborn Goliath and gives them, whenever they purchase a skill, they get to generate a random second skill from one of their primary or secondary skill sets, and those two are paired together, and each game they roll off to see which one they forget. This is a very strange upgrade. I'm not sure I would even call it an upgrade, but it is kind of fun and it's very thematic, so I do think it's good for that. But personally, I kind of like my fighters to be a little bit more reliable with their skill use than that. But, you know, it's down to what your build is. And that's all of the Genesmithing upgrades. So moving on, we are going to go through all of the Goliath tactics cards from the back of House of Chains. First off, we have Goliath. First off, we have Genetically Gifted. This tactic, you play it when you are deploying. Choose one of your fighters, and they can gain an additional Genesmithing upgrade for free. It's not included in their credit cost. This goes away at the end of the game, of course. And this fighter has to choose this from one of the Genesmithing upgrades for their particular type of fighter. You can't choose a Natborn one for a Vatborn fighter, for example. Next, we have Named and Shamed. If you use this tactics card, your gang can immediately recruit up to 2 Goliath Juves, and they are equipped with a maul and either a friend zone collar or a stim slug stash. This is a really nice one because these fighters do not count towards your crew size, so you can have extra fighters on the ground, and it is a really fun opportunity to kind of try out the friend zone rules without having to deal with the lasting consequences, for example. There is Fireborn. You play this tactic at the start of the battle. Choose up to 3 House Goliath fighters in your starting crew until the end of the battle. They become immune to the Blaze and Rad Phase traits. This is fun and very thematic because Goliaths have to endure some of the harshest conditions on Necromunda, which is actually why they were created in the first place. There is Walking Fortress. You play this tactic when activating one of your fighters. You place a furnace barricade within 1 inch of the fighter. This is a nice way to get some of the house-specific terrain on the table without having to commit to buying it. I like it. We have Hammer Blow. You play this tactic during the priority phase, after you roll for priority, but before you ready your fighters, and until the end of the phase, all friendly House Goliaths with the melee trait gain the knockback trait, which is awesome. Subconscious Mnemonics. Play this gang tactic at the start of deployment. You get to choose a friendly fighter with 2 or more skills, and you get to swap one of those skills for a different skill in the same tree. This is a nifty kind of thing, but of course you can only really use it if you have a fighter who is in the 2 skill range. Stim Reserves. You play this gang tactic when activating a friendly fighter. Choose a friendly fighter that's currently on the battlefield. Until the end of the battle, that fighter's strength is increased by D3, but you have to decrease their toughness by 1. That is a interesting trade-off. It can be really useful if you have a fighter at a crucial moment who's trying to punch through a vehicle or something, but it's kind of situational. Vat Twins. You play this tactic at the start of the battle. You choose 2 of your fighters, and they become Vat Twins. They were born together. And if during the course of the battle, one of them is taken out of action, the other loses any flesh wounds, gains the Berserker, Nerves of Steel, and Unstoppable rules. And yeah, this is kind of fun. You know, there's a very cinematic angle to it of the one twin seeing the other go down and becoming an absolute unstoppable beast. I like it. Next, there is Unleash the Fear. You play this tactic when a fighter is performing the Flex action. Any opponents that are within 6 inches and line of sight of the fighter have to take a cool check, or they become broken. This is really, really fun. You could absolutely just ruin someone's entire line of charging fighters if you did it at the right time. Crunch Time. You play this during the priority phase, and until the end of this round, all unarmed attacks gain pulverize and +1 strength. This is a really great tactic. I mean, you know, you're always going to be wanting to punch people as Goliath. Having this in your pocket means that you can take 1 round and truly make it devastating. Tempered by Battle, you play this tactic when one of your fighters takes an enemy out of action. They gain the Fearsome skill, and when they take any further fighters out of action in close combat or with a coup de grace, they gain an additional XP. Apprentice. This one is actually a little bit complicated. You choose one of your champions and either a Juve or a Prospect, and either the champion gains the Overseer skill, but they can only use it to activate that Juve or Prospect, or if they already have the Overseer skill, then using it becomes a basic action instead of a double action. So that's actually kind of a useful way to augment that, particular thing. Of course, you can only activate a Juve or a Prospect, so it does limit the utility. But the other option is that the champion gains the Mentor skill, and they can only use it when that apprentice that they've nominated gains an experience. And if they already have the Mentor skill, it means that they automatically pass leadership checks for Mentor, which is kind of cool. The Hand That Feeds You. This tactics card you play at the deployment step, and you are allowed to recruit a house agent for this battle, but it does mean that you don't gain any credits in the end phase from the battle itself, which can be a little bit of a bummer. If you are playing a mission that doesn't give out a ton of credits, though, it can absolutely give you an advantage going into the battle because you get that free house agent, and they can be real mean. Next, we have the Boost Up ability, which is honestly kind of hilarious. It allows a fighter to essentially throw someone up to 6 inches vertically and 1 inch horizontally for the cost of a double action. I think that's pretty fantastic. They're Only Bullets. This is another really iconic cinematic one. Your leader and champions all gain Nerves of Steel, and any of your gang fighters that are within 6 inches of them also gain Nerves of Steel, because their leaders are essentially telling them to stop being wusses and stand up into the field of oncoming gunfire. You'll love to see it. One Last Go. When one of your fighters is taken out of action with a ranged attack, before removing the fighter from the battlefield, they can make a free charge action and fight, and then are immediately taken out of action. This is a really great one because, sometimes you get shot when you're right about to get into that important crucial charge, and this allows you to finish the job. There is Improvised Projectile, which allows one of your fighters to take one of their close combat weapons and make it versatile with the long range of 4 inches, but they can't use the weapon for reaction attacks until the end phase of this round, because of course they chucked it across the room. And Get 'em. You play after your roll for priority, but before readying fighters. Until the end of the round, all friendly Goliath fighters activated as part of a group activation add 2 inches to their movement characteristic during their activation. This is really, really useful. This is one that if you're having the option to take them and you run a close combat focus gang, this is a really, really good one to have, because your leaders and your champions can all turn everyone in their group activation into speed demons. So definitely don't sleep on that one. And that will do it. That is House Goliath's gimmick. It's their thing. They're very good. They have a lot of interesting options. And yeah, I'm a little jealous as an Escher player that the Goliaths have such a bevy of options. The House Escher stuff is very cool, but it's very kind of situational. There's just gas and poison weapons just aren't that dominant force that they could be if there was some longer range options or some higher damage output options. But regardless, I hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and I will be coming very soon with another episode talking about House Goliath and building lists with 1 or 2 boxes. And GW just announced that they're increasing prices again, so it's especially important to try to squeeze those hobby dollars, and Necromunda is the perfect game for that. People will tell you that it's expensive, but I'm here to tell you it doesn't have to be. Alright. Thanks to Carl Casey of White Bat Audio for the music for this episode. And thanks as always to my patrons. You guys help keep this show coming week after week, so you guys are the real heroes. And of course, you can support the show on Patreon for as little as $2 a month. Just go to patreon.com/domerunners. And of course, the show has a podcast. Don't forget to check that out. domerunners.buzzsprout.com. I put out a new episode last week. And finally, everyone out there, please stay safe and don't forget to change your paint water.